Hello everyone, and welcome to the Ocean Science virtual meeting. My name is Bennett Sloan from CSIRO in Hobart, and I've been asked to provide some input to the Ocean Transport Mooring Array sessions. For those of you who don't know me or what I do, I'm mainly involved in some Western boundary current mooring arrays within the Australian context. So if we just have a think about the boundary current arrays, in addition to the ones that I work on, there's been some long-standing ones in the coast of California and relatively new ones or shorter arrays within the South Atlantic, say in the Agulhas. So there's a wide variety of time series out there, both in the Western boundary system and in the Eastern boundary system, and they have different lengths of history. So bringing those together to actually bring in an observing system of the boundary currents, whether it's Eastern or Western boundary, is a challenge that I think our community needs to address. Both how do we do it, where do we do it, and how do we get the best amount of information from the observing system that we put into the water. So for those of you who are relatively new to the boundary current systems, I'd recommend you read Robert Todd's Ocean Science 2019 paper. It gives an idea of the backgrounds of where these mooring systems are and some of the challenges that we're facing. So just a little bit more about the system that I am involved in. This is the East Australian Current Mooring System and Observing System that spans the whole of the eastern coast and seaboard of Australia. The mooring array that I actually am involved in is the East Australian Current Array, which is at 27 South. This mooring array spans from between the coastal shelf at 500 metres out to the abyssal plain at 5,000 metres. I just want to make so that this is part of what I'm considering a boundary observing system. So IMOS has heavily invested within the eastern boundary of Australia, and that includes moorings, research vessels, glider operations, and in addition to that we have the satellite information that comes in, and we have some HF radar investments at different parts along the coast. This is in conjunction with some other IMOS investments on the west and the north coast of Australia. Just some very specifics about the mooring system that I run. As I said, it's around 27 South, spanning from the shelf out to the abyssal ocean. The moorings are heavily instrumented in the upper 1,500 metres with velocity, temperature and salinity, and then we have less amounts of data and instruments below that system. So we're capturing the top. We're capturing all of the EAC, but we also capture some of the bottom flows, which are quite interesting for other research purposes. In addition to the moorings that we deploy every 18 months and recover every 18 months, we also undertake a pretty significant in situ on-board sampling regime, and this is really developing in the last 3 years, I would say, where we're collaborating quite heavily with some fishery scientists at University of New South Wales and other people, so that we're now collecting more multidisciplinary observations when we're out there with the ship, and in conjunction we're now just thinking about running a much more repeated glider sections across the mooring array at specific times through the year, and that will enable us to bring in the multidisciplinary observations to go with the physics of the temperature, the salinity and the currents. And that's one way, I think, addressing one of the questions at this session we were asked to consider was the multidisciplinary approach. Given the length of the moorings are put out and the fouling of the sensors at the moment of the BGC types of sensors, I think one of the ways we can actually address some of these is by deploying different types of observations platforms in association with perhaps the mooring arrays that we have around the different boundary systems. This gives us the information we need, but we don't have to then have sensors that we may only get 6 months out of because of fouling and other issues that might come up with those. As those sensors hopefully improve, we can then see about putting those onto the moorings themselves. I wanted to actually come in and think about another question that we were posed, and that's about the use and the challenges. And I'm actually going to put these together. So I think all of the long-term observing systems within the in situ in the ocean all face the same challenge of maintaining funding and maintaining the ability to actually build a strong user community and support of that. And so within the east coast of Australia, we're actually really thinking about, yes, we're collecting physical data, but how does that connect to a very diverse user group? And I'm just showing this here in terms of the marine ecosystems. In terms of the boundary systems, they're our connection from the open ocean to the coast, and they form a really nice and very strong connection to a coastal environment that is actually under significant amounts of pressure in a large part of the world. And so we should think about how do we develop those really strong connections with the marine ecosystem, the biosphere systems, and even into the atmospheric systems. But it's just an example of us thinking a little bit outside of our community when we want to go out there and target users for both use of the data but also support and the maintenance of these arrays. We have to show what the value to everyone is, not just our immediate users of the information. I want to actually finish with just some discussion points to perhaps help feed into this session. And I've spoken about that the boundary currents are our connections between the open ocean and the coast, and we really do need to collaborate with interested parties about how do we sustain those systems, as I've said. We need to think a little bit outside of our immediate community and outside of our science community to build those partners, because I think they'll be our strong supporters once we can actually show how the value of the data that we collect and how it can actually fulfill some of their needs and requirements. Again, I think this is going to be a major topic throughout this whole session and potentially all of this meeting, is that if we want to maintain long-term observations, we need to think about how do we keep the support going, both in terms of the funding of those systems. And we do that, I think we all do that at our national level, but is there a way that Ocean Sites can provide some useful and helpful information to those individual PIs to build support? I think as a community, talking about the ways we build that support, how do we make those connections within our wider use community, can help everyone in thinking about how do we build the arguments for the support and the continued support of these arrays. We were asked to think about what do we think Ocean Sites will look like in the 10-year plan. I think we really have to be very conscious that we need to put systems in place that meet a lot of users' requirements, and that for me they're not always going to necessarily be moorings, and we should be thinking about how our moorings connect to other types of observational platforms and think about that distributed array. We can't be everywhere, we have to be where it matters most, and if we can connect with other types of systems and observing platforms that are distributed along a coastal fringe or in a western or an eastern boundary, coming together and providing a comprehensive and cohesive plan of how these systems fit together will form a basis which I would hope would build a solid funding base, and that we actually are looking together of how we can best utilise the resources we have. I'll leave it there and open for discussions. Thank you.